Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Merrifield. Let me move my phone. And I am a holistic health coach here in Champaign, Urbana. And today we're going to talk about holistic self care. So, before we get started, let's talk about what a holistic health coach is and does. And then we'll talk about self care. So, the word holistic means treating the whole person as a system, not pieces or parts or one thing at a time, but really looking for root causes. So holistic. So the full picture. Health is, of course, a state of well being. So we're looking at the systemic well being, mind, body, spirit of a person. And as a coach, so I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian, I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe, I don't cure. But what I do as a coach is I listen and I teach and I support and I cheer and I help people on their journey to holistic health, to wellness, to whatever their goals are. So it's very much an inside out kind of approach to health rather than somebody dictating outside in. So let's move on and talk about self care and how we think about self care holistically, particularly in the troubled times that we're living in. So, in terms of what we'll learn today, and forgive me, I'm going back and forth between two screens. So, what I hope that you learn today is about how to think about self care. So, I categorize it as lowercase self care and uppercase self care. And lowercase self care are the pieces and parts, but uppercase self care is that more holistic approach. So, we'll talk about that. I want to help you think about ways to tap into your intuitive, authentic self in terms of how to find ways to care for yourself and nurture yourself. And look at the power of quiet, what that means to you, and how what that does for your brain. I also want to talk about indulging your curiosity and encourage you to do that on your journey to self care and health and wellness. And then finally, know that not one size doesn't fit all. What works for me will not work for you. We are all individuals and we all approach self care in different ways. Um, and we should know that. And it changes over time as well. All right. Whoops. So, the first thing I want to do is give you a little background on my story and my self care journey because I'm going to use some of that as examples throughout. So, my journey really started about 4 years ago. And of course, before that, I did massages and I exercised and I did self care, but I didn't really think about it in any kind of a systematic, programmatic way. So, at that point, I was in a job that I loved, a job that I thought I would retire from. I thought I would do it for the rest of my life. I was surrounded by people I thought of as my family and my friends, and I joked that I would give a kidney to any one of my coworkers, um, and I seriously would have. They were my family and my friends. Um, I'm not saying it was healthy, um, but it was how I felt, and it was such a huge part of my life. My work was such a huge part of my life that I didn't really think about self care or balance in healthy ways. So then one day, my boss decided that he was going to retire, um, and all that's fine. People retire. People can do that. But I quickly went from being in a situation where I love my job to being in a situation where I was fighting for people that I'd hired and to keep some semblance of what we had. And it was a very difficult transition, in terms of all involved. It was very, very hard to make that transition. And now I will say, I was never in danger of losing my job. There was a place for me within the new structure that emerged, but it was very different than what I had had before in terms of authority, autonomy, and responsibility. And I had to really step back, look at myself, and figure out how to negotiate those changes and um, how to fit into that world and how to care for myself, how to figure out how to care for myself. I'd been caring for other people for so long and doing for others for so long that I'd really forgotten how to look and listen to what it was that I needed and what it was that I felt. So I feel like the experiences although lots of us have many different kinds of experiences that bring us to the point where we realize that we really need to care for ourselves in different ways. Um, I feel like my experiences were transferable, and the things I learned hopefully are transferable and will help you think about how you might take care of yourself in a more holistic way on your journey to wellness. Let's see, do I need to say anything else? I think not. So self-care versus self-care, lowercase self-care versus uppercase self-care. So lowercase self-care is like this self-care menu put forward by Deepak Chopra. And he's a wonderful, wonderful teacher and wonderful master. And this is very helpful in the moment. These are all things that you can do depending on your time availability to refill your cup, to refill your inner self. They're self-care, lowercase self-care activities are activities designed to relax you and to rejuvenate you and to restore you. And they're really important. But I think of these as more of the trees. I know when I was going through my work crisis, a lot of people told me to take care of myself or to practice self-care. And that was all good advice, but I can tell you that I could have had a massage every day throughout the experience, and it would never have been enough self-care. It just that was not what I needed at the time. It helped, but it was not the whole picture. Um, I needed to do something deeper, and I would guess that you are here today because you need to do something deeper, and you need to figure out what it is that feeds your soul in order to care for yourself. So then, if these are the whoops, so if these are the kind of things that are the trees, what does the forest look like? So I like this quote: "Self-care, in essence, is the mindful taking of time to pay attention to you, not as in a narcissistic way, but in a way that ensures that you are being cared for by you." So self-care is really about cultivating lifestyle habits into your routine so that you can care for who you are and you can meet your needs. And it is very much an inside job. No one else can tell you what your self-care routine looks like. No one else can tell you the pieces you need to cultivate. Um, you have to really be able to look within and bring out, make what's on the inside show on the outside, if you are fully able and willing to care for yourself. So, first, let's talk a little bit about the science of some of what I'm going to talk about. So, there's a part of our brain called the default mode network, and it's where your mind goes when you're not otherwise actively engaged in something. So, when your mind is wandering, when you're standing at a bus stop, not looking at your phone, when your mind is free to do what it does. And research has suggested that this part of your brain is connected to your imagination and your creativity and your spontaneous thinking. And I'm sure those of you who are parents have heard the concerns about kids always being on devices and not being bored or not having that downtime. I think it's the same is true for adults. If we don't give our brains that time to go to that place where we can kind of synthesize all the experiences of life and really, really learn to hear ourselves, um, then I think we're not able to understand how to care for ourselves or how to act in the world in a way that's going to fulfill our purpose and mission on the planet. Um, so there's an author named Michael Pollan, who, if you haven't read Michael Pollan, he is fantastic. He is a professor at Berkeley and Harvard and has written many books, but he wrote one called How to Change Your Mind. And in it, he talks a lot about the default mode network. And in the oversimplification of his message, he he brings up that some have suggested that Silicon Valley happened where it did, when it did, because of psychedelic drugs, which appear to give us access to our default mode network in a way that we don't otherwise access it. And now I'm not advocating that we all go out and do psychedelic drugs or anything, but it's just an interesting thought, because the thought is that that experience, being able to tap into that part of people's brains, allowed them to expand their creativity and their ideas, and really build something that has changed our lives. Another author, Celeste Headley, has written a book called Do Nothing, and um, she discusses this part of the brain by saying, if your mind never comes to rest, there's never an opportunity for it to wander in new directions. And in her book, she talks a lot about how in our society we value busy and we value productivity, and that by putting a premium on those things, that maybe we're not tapping into um, some of the rich experiences and creative processes that we're missing out on some of those opportunities. And lastly, I want to mention Glennon Doyle, who's just written a book called Untamed. And she says, maybe our imagination isn't where we need to go to escape reality, but where we go to remember it. Maybe inside our imagination are our marching orders. And I think that's just beautiful, because I think as adults, we you're not supposed to imagine, you're not supposed to daydream, you're not supposed to let your mind wander. We're supposed to be productive all the time. And so I think there's an increasing body of research and evidence that that we are missing part of life if we're not tapping into that space within us all to figure out why we're here, how to respond, and how to go forward. I think our brains know what to do. I think we know what to do to care for ourselves. We just have to give ourselves half a chance. We have to stop and listen. So, oops, keep going one too fast. So, silence isn't empty. It's full of answers. You know more than you think you do, but you have to stop and listen. So even before I had this work crisis, I knew a little bit about self-care. I knew that if I had a tricky problem or I was trying to figure out a solution to something and it just wasn't coming, that if I went for a walk, no music, no podcast, just a quiet walk, that 9 times out of 10, the answer would come to me. And it was amazing. It worked all the time. It was like, that was one of my tools. Like, I'm going for a walk. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was giving into that silence and letting myself go into my default mode network to access what I already knew, what my subconscious knew. So I recommend for you trying this. And one thing to note in that this is very individual is that for some people, their calm, quiet place is outside. Most people, their calm, quiet place is outside. So when you are trying to calm your mind and access this space, for many of us, getting outside and getting in nature can really give us the tools and let us tap into what we have and what we already know. But for a few of us, that space is inside. And so so you need to know whether you're an inside person or an outside person, or where that space is. So I encourage you to spend a little time and think about where you find calm and where you find peace. And keep that in mind and go there when you're trying to access your creativity or kind of understand, hear your heart, know where your calm and quiet place is. Well, let's see, anything else I want to say there? All right. So what we need to do this, how do we, so we look at whether is our place outside, is our place inside. We know we need to get into the space where our head is calm and clear. how do we do this? And the first thing I want to recommend is looking into yourself. And there's a lot written about this. In fact, there was just this Wall Street Journal article about the importance of breathing, which makes me happy that this kind of work is coming to the mainstream. Because breath work has been around since ancient Ayurvedic medicine. Thousands of years, people have known the importance of breath. So I'm not going to talk too terribly much about it, except to say there's a lot out there. And I just wrote a blog post about this, in fact, about some breathing techniques and some reasons for doing it. So this Healthline article also has some techniques. So you can Google that and look to look at different breathing styles. Pranayama is what Ayurvedic practitioners call their breath work. And there are a number of tools. There's things like soft belly breathing. There's alternate nostril breathing. There's various techniques. And essentially what breath work does is it calms your central nervous system. And if you had electrodes on your head, you can see it happen. And part of the reason I talk about breath work first is because sometimes it's easier for people than meditation. Meditation has gotten a lot of attention lately, and I highly recommend. I think these are two things that you really have to do in your self-care journey. You have to give yourself the time to breathe and to spend some time meditating in quiet in your head. You can't hear yourself if you're not quiet. But breath work is sometimes easier for people. Meditation, you have to clear your mind, you have to do this, you have to do that. Breath work, you're only working on your breath. And in fact, with soft belly breathing, you lay on your back with your knees bent, and you put your hands on your stomach and you let your belly rise and fall. You breathe all the way in. And I heard one practitioner refer to it as a massage for your heart. So this is the basics. You have to look in. You have to give yourself that time and that space. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but it needs to be consistent time. So 5 or 10 minutes a day is far better than an hour a couple times a week. So I heard another scholar refer to her practice as RPM, rise, P, meditate. So that's, for a lot of people, morning is the easiest time to do it. It's before the day gets busy. You get it done. You take your 10 minutes. So it doesn't have to necessarily impact your morning routine, but you get it in. You get it. You get your mind centered before you go on with the day. So very important. So I also want to mention with breathwork and meditation, it doesn't have to be formal. So you can go to this quiet space while you're doing dishes or while you're doing laundry. And I encourage you to let yourself do that. I encourage you to find the time and give yourself the time to use those kind of routine tasks that you don't need to think a lot about, but have to be done, to allow yourself to let your mind wander. And I'll tell you a story about that a little bit later after we go on a little bit further. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of ways to tap into who you are and what your self-care needs are is looking out. Sometimes it's really hard to know, like somebody says, what do you need? What do you want? And you're like, I don't know. I can look at all the signs and patterns in the world. I can meditate all I want. I don't know. I'll tell you, during guided meditation, whenever the guide says, words may come into your head or thoughts, whatever, take note of them. They never come into my head. Like my ego panics or something. And so I know that's not a way that I can effectively hear my intuition. I hear it other times, but I can't do it under pressure. So a technique that's been really helpful for me is looking out and noting what I notice about what other people say and do, and what sticks with me and what irks me, what bothers me about that. Because I think in life we need to realize, well, we know this. Our moms have told us we're the only ones we can control. Our response is the only thing we can control. So looking at how that resonates can be really instructive. So a couple examples. One of the first times I really experienced this was when my job was in chaos and I didn't know what was going to happen. And at this point, I did think a lot of us were going to lose our jobs. Um, and I was distraught. Um, and so I was seeing a therapist, which I, of course, highly recommend. Therapists are incredibly helpful when you're in that traumatic phase. But one of the things she said to me is, what if you don't care what the people above you think? And at the time I thought, well, that's a nice thought, but how in the world do I not care about what the people above me think? They're taking away this beautiful thing that I have built and I have loved, and they don't seem to care, and there's nothing I can say or do. How am I supposed to not care what they think? But it always stuck with me because what it translated into is I may have to, in work we have to care what other people think. In life we have to care what other people think. But we don't have to present options that aren't really what we want to do. We can create our message and craft our plan in a way that lets us be in a little bit more control. So it's not chaos and it's not all externally directed. Um, that we can internally guide, or we can listen to ourselves and internally guide. So that was one of those things that hit me, and I didn't understand at the time how I could do that or what it meant, but I always remembered it, and took note of it. Another time that this happened was during the same transition period, and I was talking to my supervisor, um, and I think I drove him a little nuts because I was so like so tense and so neurotic about what was happening, um, and he was part of the problem. Um, he didn't appreciate what our program had and wanted us to move on and wanted me to move on. Um, and I was, very tense and trying to figure this out. And he said to me, um, "You have a lot of trouble with uncertainty," and then proceeded to tell me that he was very comfortable with uncertainty. Um, and whether or not he was, I don't know, but it ticked me off. It really made me angry. Like, what are you talking about? Um, but I went home and I thought about it over the course of many days and many weeks. And I thought, you know what? I do have a lot of trouble with uncertainty. All of my life, I have responded to those around me. I've responded to the authority figures. I've given them what they wanted, plus about 10% more, and they have rewarded me for that. And all of a sudden, I'm in a situation where that's not working, where I don't have clear guidance on what anybody wants. Um, and what I'm giving them is definitely not what they want. Um, and I don't know how to live in a world where I don't have those marching orders, where I have to create my own instructions. Um, and so that was a real eye-opening part of my self-care, that that I needed to learn to listen, to listen internally, to listen externally, and really figure out what I wanted first before going forward. Um, Hard, but important. And the way I figured that out was largely by looking out, because I wasn't able to look in at that point. I was in crisis. I wasn't able to look in, but I could look out and I could see those things that resonated or that hit me wrong. Um, and I will mention that through this experience and through working with a therapist and through hearing things like, you have a lot of trouble with uncertainty, I was cooking dinner one night, a routine dinner that didn't take a lot of thought. And this thought popped into my head about how I could fit in, how I could solve the question of what the future looked like, what my job looked like, um, that would both make me happy and fit within the new structure. And And it wasn't, it was like a download. It was, my mind was quiet, um, and I was listening. I wasn't thinking of anything, actually. I was just cooking dinner, and it hit me, and I went, "Huh, that's interesting." And I thought on it for a few weeks, and then I talked to some people, and you know what? It worked. So it's an example of how this, like, hearing what people are saying outside, thinking from the inside, giving yourself quiet space can really help you tune into what you need to do and how you need to do it. It's hard work, and it takes time, but I really think it's the foundation of how we care for ourselves. Because again, the massages weren't going to do it. Facials, mani pedicure, all that wasn't going to do it. I needed to figure out how to care for my soul and to look inside and to really understand what it was I wanted in life and not what other people wanted in life. And as I say, it was tough. It is tough. It remains tough. Um, but I think it's one of those things where the more you practice, the easier it gets. And the more you start looking for the signs and looking for the kindred spirits, the easier it gets. So let's talk now about dreams, because I think this is another excellent way that we can really come to understand ourselves and come to tap into what's going on in our heads. Now, I'm not talking about looking at our dreams and, Googling some dream dictionary about, like, I had a dream about eating a taco. What does that mean? Because I don't know that there's any relevance to that. And I do know that we're all our own people, and symbols mean different things to us. So I don't think external dream interpretation is beneficial, but I do think it's useful to keep a dream journal and to look at what kind of themes show up over and over and over again, and think about what they might mean in your life. So in my experience, I will frequently have a series of dreams that follow a pattern, or similar kinds of things happen. Um, and when I finally kind of have the aha moment, whatever my subconscious is trying to tell me, then I don't have that dream anymore. So it's like I know that, okay, I figured out what that was. Um, but it has definitely helped me move forward. So one of the really most to me kind of aha moments that was shown to me through a dream um, was a dream where I was at my old office staff meeting, and I was in a van driving back from the meeting, and I wasn't driving, but I was sitting next to the driver, so we're both in the front seat, and we were on the freeway, and it was just clogged, wall to wall people, like we were not moving. And then all of a sudden, she looked over at me, got a big grin on her face, pulled off the freeway, and we took off down the country roads. And I woke up and I thought, you know, I this is telling me I need to think about it in a different way. What I had done in the past is not going to work. It just, it's not the path. I need to think about it in a different day. And I talked about that aha moment when I was cooking, where I was quiet enough, and I was in the place where the pieces were coming together. The stuff that bugged me, the don't think about what people above you think. You have trouble with uncertainty. I'd had this dream, and that's when that moment happened where I thought, oh, well, this is something totally different. I'm qualified. It fits in, and it's something that maybe I want to do. So I highly recommend, looking at dreams, taking note of dreams, and trying to understand what you're trying to tell yourself through your dreams. There is a book by a woman named Toko Turner, and I will put some of these. I will link some of these references to this video. Toko Turner, she wrote a book called "Belonging: Remembering Ourselves Home," and she is a dream worker, and I think she is just really, really a fascinating, um, thoughtful person who has put some of these ideas down and taken her, the crises in her life, and kind of followed this process, with particularly looking at dreams and looking at how those dreams are helping guide us to where we need to go. So if you're interested in dreams, that's a good one. Belonging by Toko Turner. Another technique that that I think is really, really helpful in looking in and discovering what self-care means to you is looking at clutter, physical clutter in your life. Could also be electronic clutter, like if your computer is cluttered, because that clutter takes up a lot of emotional space, a lot of energy, and causes a lot of stress. And I'm not talking about decluttering to an obsessive point. We all have levels at which clutter is acceptable to us, and where it becomes stressful. And I'm talking about that point where it becomes stressful to you, and where it's taking up bandwidth that could otherwise be used for more fruitful purposes. So self-care can start with decluttering. Again, we started out by talking about looking in, and that's hard. Looking at what other people say, that's a little easier. Dreams, maybe easier, maybe not. Decluttering is something physical that we can do, to give ourselves some time and space, and to clear out that energy that we're putting into thinking about the clutter, and use that, and to give ourselves the emotional space to let our minds work on other things. So, like meditation, I think decluttering does not have to be incredibly time consuming. 15 minutes a day, if that's what you've got, pick a room and start somewhere. Um, Start slowly, so that it's not overwhelming, and be kind to yourself in the decluttering process, if this is one of your trigger points. Because creating that vacuum can really allow for understanding and self-revelation to come in. And Marie Kondo, I think, is a prime example of that. The fact that she has come into kind of cultural significance right now, is so interesting to me. So, she talks about looking at something, and does it bring joy? And if it doesn't bring joy, let it go. Speaks to this uh, this piece of a self-care routine, the decluttering piece, and the letting things go, and creating space, holding space for yourself. It's important. Oops. Another thing I want to talk about is food and diet. I don't know if you've heard the chatter lately about our guts talking to our brains. This is an area that I'm really fascinated by recently, and like, did you know that you have more microbes in and on your body than you have human cells? So we are more them than us. We truly are an ecosystem. Um, and another interesting fact is that 90% of serotonin, so the feel-good hormone, or one of the feel-good hormones in our body, is made in our gut. So by those bacteria, by the interactions between the bacteria, the microbes, there are fungi and yeast and other things, but by the organisms living in our guts, interacting with our cells, we produce the hormone serotonin. So in short, what you eat is incredibly important in terms of your self-care routine, and how you can function in the world. So take note. And I trying to remember the phrase I heard an author use. It was she called it the demise of the obvious. We get caught in all these like, is this diet best, or is this trend best, or da 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 da. So don't get bogged down in the weeds. You know what to do. Eat your fruits and vegetables. Eat your whole grains. Eat your lean proteins. Like none of that. That's all standard. Limit your sugar. Limit your white flour. Like it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to have a big elaborate scheme. Just do what you know to do. And sometimes it's easier said than done, and I do understand that. Um, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Mind your diet, feed the good microbes more than you feed those that may not be helping you produce serotonin and be a healthy member of society. So I want to mention an author that I follow and I'm really impressed by. His name is Dr. Drew Ramses, and he is a psychiatrist, and he primarily uses food to heal his patients. He's written a couple books. One called Eat Complete, The Happiness Diet, and he's got another one called 50 Shades of Kale. But he says that his overall philosophy is that our brains are made of food, and when we consume certain nutrients, our brains get bigger and grow and are smarter and happier. And he says, in my clinical practice in psychiatry, food has become one of my favorite medicines for the brain and mind. The foundation of health is food, especially when it comes to how nourishment impacts our brain health and our overall wellness. So psychiatry is starting to realize and kind of put these pieces together that food is medicine. So I'll leave it at that. Mind your diet. Think about how food works for you, and how you can really tend your ecosystem in a way that helps it and helps you be healthier and more well and care for yourself. And then the last thing I want to talk about is curiosity. So finding your passion or finding your path can be daunting. I've said that a couple times. Sometimes it's hard to know where we want to go, and it's a lot of pressure. And sometimes when we put that pressure on ourselves, it's even harder to get there. So, so sometimes it's easier to not worry about your life's purpose or what your self-care routine should be or what steps you should take, but to step back and just look at what makes you curious, what makes you go, Um, Elizabeth Gilbert, we got a cat here. Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love, you remember that, the book in that movie, has also written a book called Big Magic, which is about finding your creative power and your internal juice to feed your soul, essentially. And she talks a lot about how those big aha moments are few and far between, but that if you find a book you're interested in or an article you're interested in, allow yourself the time and space to explore that. There's another author named Julia Cameron who she wrote a book called The Author's Way, maybe? I might have the title wrong. Julia Cameron is her name. And she suggests that we all give ourselves what she calls artist states. And that is a day, if you can spare that, or an hour or 15 minutes, where we just really basically indulge our curiosity, where we do something that's not necessarily productive, but or productive, traditionally productive, but is something that we want to do or that we're curious about, and we take it where it goes. I mean, I will tell you that this path, this holistic health coach path that I'm on, has come about largely through this. You know, my career has been at a university for the past 25 years, and it's been largely good, and it's still good. But I found that that in tuning into myself and listening to myself and doing the practices that I've laid out here, that it was no longer quite enough. And I wanted to find a way to explore both what I'd learned through the job crisis, and some inherent curiosities and interests that I'd had all my life, and how to use that to see what comes of it. So this process, this webinar, my website's in the writing that I'm doing has all come about this curiosity, this interest in, like, I'm really fascinated by this, and maybe other people will be too. So we'll see. Um, there's another a blogger who used to do a blog called The Daily Love. His name's Martin Kipp, and I don't think he's still doing it, unfortunately. But one of the things that he said and he stood by is that fear is not the opposite of love. That if we fear something, it's our compass. If something's a little scary, it probably means you should go there. You should try at least. And, I'm certainly not saying, skydive if you're terrified of it or something like that, but just take some baby steps. This seems a little scary. This seems out of my comfort zone, but I'm interested. I'm curious. What happens? And in a lot of cases, I think it helps to think, what's the worst that happens? If I try this and it doesn't work, then I don't do it again, and it's okay. But curiosity, huge and important, and sometimes a little easier to access than trying to figure out the big picture all at once. Is there anything else I want to say about that? Yeah, that's a lot of times we don't know where the path will take us. Um, we do have to be uncomfortable in uncertainty, but explore, see what happens, follow your curiosity. So then some final thoughts on self-care, and I've listed a few here, but I think the one of the main key takeaways, well, several main key takeaways, but this is not optional. You don't have a self-care practice when you have time for it or when you have money for it. It needs to be a part of your life, and it does not have to take a lot of time and money. It should not take a lot of time and money. It really amounts to giving yourself the time and space and loving yourself enough to hear what's going on in your head and to think about how it is you fit in the universe and what place you play, what place you want to play, um, in the larger picture. What else to say? I, another person's joy, one person's joy is another person's torture. So don't feel that that if something works for somebody else, it may not work for you, and that's okay. Um, it also changes over time. What we need changes over time. What brings us joy and makes us happy changes over time. And again, that's okay. So this is an iterative process. We have to do it continually. We have to listen. That breath work, that meditation I talked about, all that stuff. That's a lifetime uh, commitment to yourself. And it's not a choice. You have to do it. This relationship ideology quote, I think, is interesting and sort of shows what happens when we don't. And I certainly don't mean to gender it. I don't think this is limited to women, but um, we're we we're very good at hurting ourselves. We're good at taking from ourselves to give to others. And self-care is really about figuring out how to give to yourself so you can give to others. So think about that. Think about that as you go about your days and decide what you're going to do and decide how you're going to do it. It's not optional, and you hurt yourself and you don't help others by not listening and by not really understanding what contribution you're here to make. With that, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking it out to the end. Here are my my website and my email. Please feel free to reach out and talk to me if you've got questions or comments. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram right now, so I'm happy to entertain thoughts and suggestions and how this has played out in your life, and hopefully it's helpful. So thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you soon.